Hi, I'm Kimm Phillips from the Parent Information Center. Welcome to Promoting Family-School Partnerships. In this session, we'll be reviewing the different roles that parents play in transition and how that impacts the continued challenges that we have in engaging families. We'll become familiar with the dual capacity building framework, which really outlines the skills and strategies and the key components of what needs to be in place to build and strengthen family-school partnerships. We'll talk about Next Steps New Hampshire tools for family engagement and the Next Steps New Hampshire website that has a lot of resources there. And we'll identify how you can keep the door open to sustaining family-school partnerships. In your materials today, you should have, you should have a handful of materials, including the presentation handouts that look like this. There's a mapping exercise that looks like, hold on. A mapping exercise that we'll do. There are critical components of family involvement practices, the family roles that talk about the different roles that families play in their child's education, a graphic of the dual capacity building framework, a worksheet for the dual capacity building framework, a team action plan, and there are also other resources that you can access for after the webinar if you're interested in learning more about family school engagement, particularly in high school and preparing for transition. So let's get these out of the way and keep going. We're going to start by just orienting you a little bit to Next Steps New Hampshire. The goal of Next Steps New Hampshire, it's a SPDG, a State Personnel Development Grant, and it's to increase the number of students with disabilities or at risk of dropping out of high school to be college and career ready in New Hampshire. And we do this through a number of research and evidence-based transition practices. And I'll go into each of these briefly. The participatory adult learning strategies, referred to as PALS, the taxonomy for transition program that was developed by Paula Kohler, a national guru in transition. The New Hampshire standards for family engagement, which are based on the national standards, the national PTA standards for family engagement. We'll talk briefly about implementation science, and then, as I mentioned earlier, get into the capacity building framework. Some of the essentials through Next Steps New Hampshire, being a state personnel development grant, we provide training and coaching. So the training introduces and illustrates different practices, and then the coaching really is about putting those practices to use. Before we get into some of the research base, I just want to bring you to the Next Steps New Hampshire website and show you some of the resources that you can find there. So here we are at the website, and you can see here that you can access, I'm figuring out my life for after high school, and you can also access that here. So it's set up for multiple entry methods for students. The educator or parent portal is the same as I help students figure out the future. And there's also a tab here for community partners. In this area here, you'll see updates of some of the activities that are going on. Sometimes they're school updates or what's going on statewide. And you can see here is Fixed Partnering for Strength Conference, regional transition fairs. There's an opportunity to take a website tour here, and that will help you find some of the information you want. And I'm also going to scroll back up here to the top. The Transition IEP tool contains lots of information, helpful information about Indicator 13. There's information for college faculty who are looking at including family engagement and transition in pre-service. There's a number of resources, publications, videos. everything about transition. And here's where a lot of tools will be that we'll come back to later, but there is an area here I'll just briefly go over now for family engagement, and then the tools that we're going to go over later. I'll bring you directly to the tools, but you can find them here at this tab. There's written materials, guides, brochures for distribution. And we also have an online training for parents or school personnel about the transition components in the IEP. Here you can also find other workshops that we've developed for families and school staff. And there's also a skills checklist that we'll talk about later, but those will all be located on the website. Let me go back home. Under everything about transition, family engagement, and next steps tools for family engagement. Oh, I'm losing it there. And then there's also information here about Next Steps New Hampshire in general, implementation science, and PALS. So let's get out of this and go back to the PowerPoint. So I talked about PALS a little bit, and the theory behind PALS and with the training and coaching is, as I mentioned, training really introduces and illustrates. So we're at that top bubble right there, and today I'm going to introduce some ideas, talk about some different ways and give some examples of things that you can do at your school or district. And then you'll have the opportunity to go back and practice and assess how you're doing implementing those. With PALS, you'll want to go back and review and reflect what worked and what didn't work, and then start to enhance your practices and come to a deeper understanding. And this is really part of the coaching that goes on to help bring you full circle, and then bring you full circle again as you become familiar with the material and you want to learn more. Then you're introduced and illustrate, you're introduced to more materials and then practicing new applications. The taxonomy for transition has 5 components that are key to successful transition to a transition-focused education, and those are student-focused planning, student development, interagency collaboration, program structures, and then family engagement. We changed the taxonomy a little bit. This was adapted, as I said earlier, by Paula Kohler. And we changed some of the family engagement components so that they would align with the New Hampshire standards. So the components that are most likely or most necessary in transition are two-way communication, shared decision-making, and transition-related opportunities. And we're going to talk about some of that a bit more. There are actually 6 critical components to family engagement. And that is respecting diversity, two-way communication again, shared decision-making, understanding transition law, connecting to resources, and providing families with transition-related trainings and opportunities that aren't always trainings, but how are we getting information to families? As I mentioned, it's also built on implementation science, and you can find more information about PALS and about implementation science on that Next Steps New Hampshire website. But implementation science really talks about mapping out what the current practices are and assessing your needs and identifying possible programs. After doing that, we're going to do a little bit of that today, kind of looking at some of your programming that you've done in the past and identifying how you might enhance that. The next part is to install some of those practices, to establish a team for family engagement, to develop an action plan, and you'll start that at the end of this webinar today, and to start to set up an infrastructure for support and provide introductory trainings to that team and and to other people who are interested in learning more about family engagement. Initial implementation is really when you start to get started and get better. So you're implementing your action plans, you're identifying some of the challenges, and you're really starting to develop the processes and procedures for implementation. And then full implementation, in the bottom in the green left corner, is when things are in place. The system is recalibrated so that the new initiatives are supported, and all throughout this, throughout all of these 4 steps, the eye is always on sustainability. So as you're going through, as you're exploring, installing, and implementing, what are the program structures that are in place, or what are you identifying that needs to be in place? The same with resources, with training and coaching. What kind of training and coaching do you have available to you now? And what kind of training and coaching do you need? And thinking about the procedures and the oversight to make sure that things are moving along, and that we've all worked someplace at some time where we had a person who was, doing great things, or a small group of people, and then when they left, that initiative went away. So really keeping your eye on sustainability. We're going to start right out with an activity. And so if you have this handout in front of you, or you can just use a piece of paper to start listing some of the things that your school or district has done around family engagement efforts related to transition. So just take a few minutes. If you're by yourself, you can do this, or if you're with a small team, do it as a group activity. But list out some of the things that your school has been doing in the past year or so, or a couple of years, around family engagement, specifically related to transition. And I'm going to pause for a minute and recommend that you pause the webinar now as you do this activity, and then when you are ready to come back, certainly start the webinar again. Okay, hopefully you've had time to write down some activities or different initiatives. I should have clarified before that it's not always an activity that we're looking for, but how are you engaging parents in your school specifically to transition. So let's move on to, let's see, here we go. Making sure that we're all working off of the same definition of family engagement. And this definition comes from Karen Mapp. And she says that family engagement is any way that a child's adult caretaker effectively supports learning and healthy development. And there are a number of ways that families do participate, and it doesn't necessarily mean coming to events. So you have a handout that you can keep that talks about the different family roles. I'm going to briefly review them. So folks can be supporters of their child's learning and development at home. They can encourage them with a positive self-image. They can have a can-do spirit in their children. They can monitor their time at home, setting boundaries, making sure people are doing their homework, making sure that students have resources. Parents can be models of lifelong learning, and sometimes that means formal learning, or sometimes it's informal learning, just researching on the internet or having an interest and being a lifelong learner. Sometimes with special education, parents are thrust into roles that they may not feel ready for. Advocates, activists for improved learning opportunities. Parents are advocating for their children and hopefully developing the skills to do that. They're becoming decision makers of educational options for their children, and eventually perhaps collaborating with the school staff and members of the community on wider issues of school improvement and education reform in the community. Parents can be anywhere on this continuum. Some parents stay in a certain area, some parents move up and down, some parents might play different roles for different children in their lives. And it's important to recognize that when we're looking at these family roles, that sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, because of the way that special ed is implemented, parents can at times become advocates and activists and not really be prepared for those roles or decision makers. And so sometimes what we might see in a meeting or in conversations or contacts with parents, we may see that parents are frustrated or not sure of how to communicate what their needs are, and it really can come from a lack of opportunity to learn some of those skills around advocating and decision making. And so we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can help parents to improve those personal skills and become partners in education. So I'm going to break into the framework now and really just going through this. You also have this as a handout. And the challenge really is the lack of opportunities for school program staff to build capacity and partnerships. There's not a lot of pre-service around family engagement in post-secondary ed for folks who are going on to become teachers or work in special education. Folks do that because they want to teach, because they want to help students, and not always recognizing the need to also work with families. And also the lack of opportunities for families to build capacity and partnerships. So sometimes we'll hear folks say, oh, go work together, go partner, just go do that, and assume that everybody has the skills to do that. And what we're finding, and what Karen Mapp has found, is that that's not necessarily the case. People don't inherently have those skills. We're going to talk about some of the conditions. We're going to get into both the process and the organizational conditions a little bit later. We're going to start by talking about the policy and program goals, also known as the 4 C's, and then talk about what the outcomes are, because we all want great outcomes where school staff are honoring and recognizing the value of having families and connecting with families, and families are more able to comfortably negotiate those multiple roles. So I talked about the program goals, about building capacity, and those are referred to as the 4 C's. And the 4 C's are capabilities, developing the skills and knowledge to work together. And again, this is for school staff or district staff and administrators, as well as families. Talk about the connections and the relationship building that need to be in place. Confidence, we all want to enhance and know our own strengths and have a sense of being able to work with others, and how that confidence builds over time. And also cognition, which is our beliefs and our worldview. So how are we looking at each other as parents, as school staff, district staff, administrators? Are we seeing each other as valuable partners? Are we seeing each other as us versus them? So how do we increase these 4 C's? So first up is capabilities, skills, and knowledge. A lot of times family engagement activities focus on families alone in building skills and knowledge, and that can create at times tension if families are being trained or engaged to become more active in their children's school, and they can be met sometimes with an unreceptive climate, unwelcoming climate from school staff who are not prepared or ready for this. And yet parents do need to know about student learning, about the inner workings of a school system, and about appropriate advocacy skills. And on the other hand, staff need to know about the community, need to know about the cultural competency, have a level of cultural competency and knowledge around the people in the community, each family in the community, and not always ethnicity, but just socioeconomic standings, education, where different people have different values around education, around employment, different beliefs around family roles, military culture, religious culture. So understanding that, and also the need to begin to build trusting relationships with families. So that's the first thing that we're going to focus on when we're focusing on building those 4 C's. The next one is connections. Family to teacher, parent to parent, teacher to teacher. We want to create connections and relationships on all different levels and stop working in different silos or being in different silos. Sometimes the parent-to-parent connections can be difficult because of the way that we have to follow the requirements around confidentiality, but thinking about how can we connect parents to each other, how can they have networking time when time to get to know each other if they are coming to events, or are there different forums that provide them an opportunity to connect. And families serving on leadership teams or subcommittees with school staff really provide an opportunity for parents and teachers or school staff to get to know each other outside of an IEP meeting and start to build trust outside of that meeting. The next one is confidence. And as we see those connections start to grow, and as we see capabilities start to grow, people begin to develop confidence about their own abilities. They start to have an I can versus an I cannot belief about themselves. As connections and relationships are developed, staff and families begin to develop a sense of comfort in working with each other and engaging in partnership activities, and develop a sense of respect for diverse belief systems and diverse values. And then the last one is cognition. And cognition isn't a word we typically use, but I think we needed to stick with the C's here. So cognitions, beliefs, and world value. When we're building capabilities and connections and confidence, then families are starting to see themselves as partners with the school. They understand that they can play multiple roles, and schools are committed to working with parents as partners, and they believe that partnerships improve student learning and improve school outcomes. They start to move away from us versus them kind of mentality and see the value of each other's expertise. So we're going to pause in just a moment for this second activity. And if you're in a group, you'll do this individually. And if you're watching by yourself, then you will do this by yourself. But just thinking to yourself, this is, again, if you're in a group, it's not a group activity. It's really thinking about this for you, for yourself, and making a list that you're aware of that highlights existing capabilities for staff or for yourself. What do you know if you're at a school, or what if you're at a parent do you know or think you need to know, and what's missing? And then spend a few minutes thinking about your connections, thinking about who you're connected to at the school, who you're connected to for parents, and what are some of the things that you might be able to do to enhance some of those connections, to make additional connections for planning for life after high school. Where are you at with your confidence around engaging families for planning for life after high school? As I said in the beginning, there's not a lot of pre-service opportunities, so sometimes you have a little lack of confidence starting to stretch outside of your comfort zone, working with parents, engaging families, and where do you see that they fit in the work that you do with students, and how or what needs to be done to help increase your confidence and or the confidence of parents. And then cognition. Lastly, think about for a few minutes and jot down some notes for each of these on how your values and your beliefs inform your work, and how does it impact parents' ability to work with you? How are you showing your values and beliefs positively or negatively? Again, this is a private exercise for yourself, but thinking about these 4 areas, jotting some notes down, and we'll come back to this in a few more minutes. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time. If not, then you can pause it right now if you forgot to pause it during the activity. And we're going to move on to sharing this with your group, or reflecting if you're by yourself to a debrief if you're in a group, or again, a reflection if you're by yourself, to thinking about where you are now and thinking about if you found you had capacity in some areas and not others, identifying areas for growth. What did you learn about yourself, and how do you think that what you learned about the 4 C's might impact planning for some of the future strategies that you might try at your school? So again, I'm going to pause the video and also encourage you to pause and take a few minutes to reflect and write down some thoughts on this, as well as if you are in a group, discuss that, and then come back when you're ready. Next, we're going to talk about the process conditions from the framework. The process conditions are what needs to be in place. They identify what needs to be in place as you're developing your family engagement strategies. So the first one is that it's relational. And that means that there's a purposeful, intentional opportunity to build trust, to learn about each other. There's a focus on building relationships, and this is especially important during the transition process, but can also be the most challenging, particularly with a child who has an IEP, with a family who has an IEP. People are coming in with their own history, with their own backgrounds, their own belief systems, and so how can we really work to develop relationships with people that are respectful? And you'll see that I've put relational as the first process condition, because really the base to any strong collaborative team is the relationships amongst the team, the trust, and the belief that, you know, we all have each other's backs. So the first one is relational, and looking at how you can help families and how you can help staff to develop relationships outside of an IEP meeting. The next is developmental, that parents and teachers are looking at each other through asset-based lenses. So not that parents or school staff need to be fixed, but thinking about what are reciprocal relationships. How can we empower and enable families and school staff to be confident, active, knowledgeable, informed stakeholders working together, starting where people are at, and they're going to be in all different places, and moving them forward. So how can we provide families with information about different options to help move them forward in the decision-making process? Where can we start to help families to develop skills and help staff to develop skills from where they're at? The next one is linked to learning. The element of being linked to learning is really a best practice, and the research identifies that workshops and trainings that provide parents with an opportunity to learn are ways that schools can reach out to parents. They are successful. That parents are needing information about, as we talked about earlier, about transition law, about rights and responsibilities, about how to prepare for potential guardianship or decision-making issues with their child, or how to help their child look at different colleges, or what is life like after high school. So how can we help to educate parents and educate staff around those issues? And it's important to think that family engagement isn't one person's job, so that we're creating opportunities that are linked to learning for staff and for parents. The next one is that it is collaborative, that we're doing things with families and not for families. Oftentimes, schools will plan a parent event with very little parent input. So how can we create a team when we're thinking about either hosting an event or redoing a website, or looking at how we get information out to the community? How can we do that with parents? How can we invite parents in to be part of that process? And again, remembering that it's not one parent or one, not parent, I'm sorry, it's not one school staff's responsibility or district staff's responsibility to take on family engagement alone. But we're creating collective opportunities for people in special education to work together and looking at how we can develop those strategies in partnership. And the last is that it's interactive, which is a key component to adult learning or all good learning. People learn best oftentimes if they can touch it, feel it, do it, be in the thick of it. And so that's one of the things that we're talking about and learning now is how can we have an opportunity, create opportunities for people to try out their new skills and working on practicing together, families and school staff, some of these new skills. So all of these pieces, like I said, really do lead back to the best practices in adult learning. It's collaborative, it's interactive, it's relational, and those are the process conditions, the things that need to be in place as you're looking in the framework. The other thing is the organizational conditions. So what does the organization need to enhance, increase, sustain family engagement? So the term organizational implicitly recognizes, again, that it has to be fully developed and not just through one or even two people, that the organizational leaders, the administrators, the school boards, superintendents, senior level, district leaders, ground level staff, how are we all working together to develop the conditions necessary to implement and sustain partnerships over time? What are the resources that are needed to make sure that they can be sustained? You know, time and money are two of the largest resources, and so how are we making sure that there are resources and that there's infrastructure so that family engagement eventually just becomes kind of the way we do business, that when we're thinking about starting a new initiative or starting a new program or a new committee, how are we looking at making sure that we're continuing to engage families and that they're integrated, family engagement is integrated with other programs in the school. So we're going to go back to that mapping activity that we did at the very beginning, or the list of activities that you've done. And from that mapping activity, choose one or two and align it with some of the process conditions from that are identified in the dual capacity building framework. So pulling out an activity or a strategy that you and your school work to engage families in, and looking at, is that activity or strategy linked to learning? Is it helping to build relationships? Is it meeting people where they're at? Is there an element of people working together outside of IEP meetings? Are they interactive? Do they provide time for people to practice new skills, to and again, going back to relational, to develop those relationships? And I also want to stress here, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, but that it's not always about parents coming to events. Engaging families can take on many different, there's a variety of ways to engage families, and some of them, as I mentioned, can be looking at your website, including families on different leadership teams, but what are some meaningful ways that you can engage families, and then what are the conditions that you are including in that to evaluate their effectiveness. So you can pause here again. I'll pause as well and come back when you've had an opportunity to go through one or two of your activities and look at how it is, and if you're how it is meeting some of the process conditions, and if you find that there are things that you can do to enhance what you're already doing. So I'm not talking about taking on some new activity at this point. I'm really just talking about looking at some of the things that you're doing and enhancing it and aligning it with what we've learned through the framework. Okay. Next, I want to share with you, I'm going to go back to the website. So we're kind of at the point now where we are wrapping up talking about the dual capacity building framework, and we're going to get into some of the specific resources and strategies developed under Next Steps to increase and sustain family engagement. So I'm going to go back to the website, and as I mentioned, the links on this page bring us directly to the tools, but they are listed under everything about transition, family engagement, Next Steps tools for family engagement. The first thing I'm going to bring up is the Family Engagement Team's Guide. And this was developed as part of our work. We initially had schools complete self-assessments, and then also had family focus groups where families use that same assessment process to give feedback to the school around family engagement practices. And from those focus groups started to develop family engagement teams with school staff. So this guide here, Family Engagement Teams, goes through, it provides information about the benefits of starting with a focus group, provides specific focus group strategies that we've used in Next Steps, including how to choose parents to participate, how to report out the data, sample questions that were built around the Next Steps framework or critical components, as I talked about earlier. Has outreach scripts, parent letters, and talks about how to debrief after the meeting, some questions that you may want to ask. It has some information here. You can see some quotes from family engagement team members, from parents, special ed case managers, and administrators. And I'm not going to scroll through the entire document, but again, it really just goes through and provides a lot of direction for schools to use in looking at how to put a focus group together, things to think about beforehand, the day of, afterwards, all of that. So we're going to close that one out. And the next one is a brochure that just will share with you some of the other trainings that PIC has developed as part of this grant that you have access to. If you choose to, you can call the Parent Information Center. We have a student series for empowering youth to become more engaged and involved in their IEP process. It's a 3-part series designed to last between, well, they're designed for 90-minute sessions, but they can be adapted to 45 or 75-minute sessions. Talks about some of the materials that we have here. And then the workshops that we offer, which are Planning for Life After High School, really focusing in on the IEP, the family school partnerships, which this is part of that. We have a workshop for families and for school staff who might be unfamiliar with extended learning opportunities. Asking the right question is a technique that came out of a Cambridge Institute and really just goes over how to prepare to ask simple, straightforward questions and prioritize them when you have limited time to ask. Listening to Your Child's Voice is an interactive panel that includes parents talking about how to, some of the practices that other parents have used to build independence. Walking in Your Shoes and agreeing on a way forward, managing difficult conversations. Those are 2 that we have on communication. And if you're interested in any of those, you can feel free to reach out to the Parent Information Center. The next one is a transition fair guide. And a lot of the information for this transition fair booklet, although not all, was taken from an NTACT, a very comprehensive transition fair planning guide So we kind of pulled some of the key information from that, as well as some other resources, along with work that we had done with one of our cohort schools and planning a fair, talking about the components of a transition fair, how to include presenters, how to think about breakout sessions, how to reach out to vendors, and again, goes through things to consider, as well as providing some best practices and ideas for getting the fair in place. So I would encourage you to look at that. And of course, if you are having a transition fair, you may want to think about contacting PIC to have a table there to provide information to parents, staff, and students. We have a Life After High School Transition Toolkit. Oh, that doesn't go to the toolkit. All right. But this is on the website, and it's a comprehensive booklet for families to look at the IEP, to think of it. Has some model IEPs in there, some samples, goes over what the language is, goes over the different components. So that's something that you could direct parents to, or you could download or request copies to distribute to families. And no, that's not going to go there either. And we also have developed a family and student engagement skills checklist. And this goes over the specific things, the specific strategies to working with families and students at an IEP meeting. And this can be used as a self-reflection tool, or it can be used as a peer assessment tool, but it's certainly not meant to be used as a supervisory tool. But it talks about things about how did you prepare the student to participate, or prepare the family to participate, or check for understanding. There's a list of 10 different strategies or 10 different behaviors that you can show throughout the transition process, and you would rate yourself if you used it as a reflection opportunity, and then kind of give examples of what you did. You could also kind of, if you were doing it after a meeting, look for those moments that were learning opportunities, and you could write in some things that you might want to do next time. Or you could use it to prepare for a meeting with families or students, just kind of reminding yourself, these are the things I want to do, and these are the ways I'm going to do them. So those are some of the Next Steps New Hampshire resources. What we've heard from families over the course of Next Steps through schools who have used the framework and some of the tools created, these are quotes that we've had from families, and you can see that they're definitely feeling more confident. They're feeling more connected with school staff. They have a better understanding of their role. They have a better understanding of who the players are in the IEP process. And so it just really gives credence to looking at how you engage families. Now we're going to switch gears again a little bit and talk about promoting high expectations in families and engaging families in transition. So a lot of what we've talked about are kind of ideas or things to put in place, but they're not practical examples. And oftentimes when we present information about the framework, people are still looking for, but what do I do? And it's important to recognize that every school is in a different starting place. So not every school is going to do the same things. It's really about looking at what you've done, looking at who your parents are, who your staff are, and figuring out what's best for your school or district. So we created this infographic from this research paper around promoting high expectations for post-school success. And really, I'm just going to go through these 7 areas and give some ideas around how to work with families and engage families to promote high expectations. Promoting high expectations for post-school success. So the first one is Engaging parents in training opportunities in a variety of formats to address transition-related school and adult services, eligibility and access. So how are we engaging parents and engaging families in those training opportunities? And again, it doesn't always have to be events. So we could engage parents by providing and distributing information, so brochures, flyers, the toolkit I showed earlier, having information on the websites, contact information in user-friendly formats, connecting families with resources and adult service agencies before students leave high school, so they're starting to develop those relationships and develop that trust early. Maybe working with parents and those agencies and youth to provide opportunities to tour other facilities or other vendor offices so that they have a comfort level. It may be providing them with a checklist of questions to ask other adult providers or other community providers. So really arranging for ways for parents to look at some of those after high school opportunities and partners and resources. If they're struggling, refer them to the PTI, to the Parent Information Center, so that they can understand their rights and responsibilities around transition. Refer them to agency representatives and talk to them about the application processes and eligibility requirements for different adult support service providers or independent living centers. So how, again, the key is to engage parents in transition-related training opportunities in multiple formats. The next one is exploring role models, connecting families and students to successful adults with disabilities, to arrange for alumni to serve as speakers, as mentors, to provide mock interviews, spotlight youth who have succeeded in areas of post-school life, in gaining employment, attending college, obtaining certifications, living independently, and everybody's level of independence is different. Using social media, using the newspaper, websites to share and celebrate achievements with as large an audience as possible, providing vetted books, blogs, videos that portray the benefits of high expectations. It could be setting up a family support group focused on transition, bringing families and students or graduates together to alleviate fears, to exchange ideas, to come up with solutions, to provide encouragement. So really providing that information and exploring role models and helping families and youth to see successful role models in the community after high school. The next one is to interact respectfully, acknowledging that all families have their own unique culture. It could be linguistic differences, it could be ethnic differences, as I mentioned earlier. It's oftentimes around beliefs and values. Some families may come from disadvantaged areas. Some families have culturally and linguistic diverse backgrounds. They may have negative or very little experience with formal education. Many Western cultures think self-advocacy and self-reliance, they put a lot of value on that. And there are other cultures that put a lot of value on contributions to the family over the well-being of the individual. So if independent living doesn't align with family goals, educators can still share information about the benefits of high expectations in general, but remembering to think about the other cultures and ask members from other cultures about their beliefs and develop communication and support strategies. Seek to understand each family's unique expectations and develop trusting relationships. And when we're talking about developing relationships, it always takes a level of patience because families and students need to earn you need to earn their trust. They've been through multiple years of having changes in perhaps case managers, teachers, schools, and so they're always in the position to be rebuilding trust. Begin planning early. Seek family buy-in for transition planning. Ensure that families understand that entitlement to special ed services ends upon graduation, and their role, the family's role in collaborative planning, and help families to see that effective transition planning will guide activities and services throughout the entire IEP. So by raising expectations and identifying where a student is now and what they need to accomplish their post-secondary goals, if they start early, they have more opportunity to make that happen. Use student-led IEPs to engage families. Partner with families to practice self-determination skills by letting students lead their own IEP meetings or have a strong role at their IEP meetings. Have students prepare in advance to share their future goals. Maybe each year start at a high school level, and each year have students assume increased responsibilities for describing their present levels of performance, their support needs, drafting their annual goals, their benchmarks, but begin planning early with both parents and students in the transition process and have high expectations. Next is partnering with families to support their young person's independence. So recognizing that families are instrumental in helping youth to develop life skills and mindsets that set the stage for adulthood. Suggest ways that families can use everyday activities such as chores, budgeting, medical appointments, household problem solving to build basic life and employability skills. Work closely with young people and with their families to identify naturally occurring supports, identify places that the family parents no longer need to be the primary caregiver, that there are other immediate or extended family members, neighbors, friends that can help. Sometimes families don't have high expectations because they're afraid of how that might affect them and put more burden on the parents, actually. But knowing that and working with others to help to take on some of that responsibility and decreasing family responsibility can actually increase high expectations. So supporting expectations for life after high school can be increased by mapping out natural supports to build a circle of support that doesn't require funding, doesn't require laws to ensure that they exist, but look at what people have available to them in social capital. And empowering families to trust their instincts about their youth's future and help them to build a network of supports. All parents have hopes and dreams that their child will achieve great things, but when a parent has a child with a disability, those goals may need to be modified, not expecting less, but expecting different. So empower families to trust their instincts, to provide clear, easy to understand requirements to various pathways to high school graduation, to career goals, to college entrance requirements, specific training for occupations. Help families understand those and empower them to trust their instincts and build that natural network of supports. Encourage families to link with other school-based professionals, guidance counselors. Ensure families participate in decisions around whether their student needs more than 4 years to complete high school to achieve their transition-related goals, and that they understand that students may postpone accepting their diploma to access some of the transition-related services. So they may not graduate in a typical 4-year track, but receive those services by staying in school. And lastly, working with families to support student success in all domains. And really looking, although school really focuses on academic, but looking at how you can help families to have student success in recreational, extracurricular, and community participation activities. Although school, as I said, focuses primarily on academic and career-related prep, families may take the lead on engaging students in other community activities, but encourage families to have their youth participate in school and community-based activities that promote teamwork, that promote leadership. Could be a school newspaper, a club, a youth board, could be a local nonprofit volunteer position. Share a list of school clubs and recreational activities, including costs and materials needed, contact information. Share that with families. Oftentimes, students who struggle academically excel in other areas, excel in sports, excel in the arts, and these interests can help them to explore their strengths and offer career pathways. So much of the IEP process seems to focus on the challenges and disabilities, but by looking at all their different domains of life, we really have the opportunity to look at what are a child's strengths and how can we make sure that they have an opportunity to be seen through the view of the strengths. So really keeping the door open. As parents have been included and their engagement has been encouraged, they've been willing to take on a larger part of helping the school to engage other families in family engagement activities. So thinking about how you can continue to respect diversity, thinking about the communication processes you have in place, how you offer parents the opportunity for shared decision making, making sure that they know all of the different options, the pros and cons of the different options, and supporting decision making. Looking at how families are connected to understanding the laws around transition, the resources that are available to them through ongoing family transition training, and then for the school to be doing ongoing self-assessment around meeting those needs and working with families to also assess how the school is doing. So that's a lot of information. We're going to wind up by reflecting on all of the information and activities and either discussions or notes that you've taken from today's training, and using some of the reference materials that you have available to develop an action plan. So this is also one of the handouts that you should have, or you can just kind of scratch this out on a piece of paper. But taking some time now, while it's all fresh in your mind, to reflect on the information you have and identify some team members to work on a goal. So what is a goal that you might have around family engagement? And then what is the objective of that goal? What is the why that you're doing it? And what is the intended outcome? And then take a few minutes to start looking at what are some of the actions, who's responsible for those, the start and target date, the evaluation plan, and then when are you going to reconvene or follow up, either convene or reconvene a group, and who's going to be responsible for taking that on. So I'm going to pause for just a minute, and then we're just going to come back briefly and wrap up. Okay, well, I want to thank you for participating today, and I wanted just to go over a couple of things to remember. We talked about a lot, and I shared a lot of information. Hopefully you were able to pull out some gems for yourself, for your school, for your district. but just remembering that it takes time, that there's a process to implementing family engagement, that it's a strategic process that really starts with today, exploring where you're at and identifying what you need to do, and then starting with the action plan that you'll be leaving with, and getting out there and starting to do it, and starting to figure out what you need to do and how to get better, start to address some of those challenges, and then just review and assess and think about the things that you're doing or the things that you're attempting to do out of the gate. How are they going to be sustainable over time? So first do it right, then do it better. That really today we just went through introducing and illustrating, and now you'll have the opportunity to practice and to assess how it's going. You'll hopefully take some time. I mean, that's really key, is that time to review and reflect and evaluate the work, and looking at the framework, and looking at how you're including those process conditions, reflecting on that, and using the skills checklist also that's on the website when you're meeting with folks one-on-one. And then starting to develop a deep understanding. So it really, the strategy acknowledges that true mastery doesn't happen in a training session. It requires practice, it requires reflection, it requires the development of deep understanding, and that takes time. And through that time and that commitment, we can start to shift our family engagement from focusing on programs to focusing on relationships, to focusing on people. That our relationships are going to not be adversarial, but they're going to be strength-based, that they're going to be collaborative, that we're not hosting random acts of family engagement, but that family engagement is systemic in the work that we do. They're not individual. It's not one person's job. It's a shared responsibility. And it's a shared responsibility not only at the school, amongst people at the school and district level, but it's also a shared responsibility for families. And so include those families. Remember, do with, not for. That family engagement isn't compliance driven. It's not something you have to do to check the box, but that it's really learning driven, outcome driven. That it's not service related, it's not fixing families, but meeting people where they're at. And similar to a one-time project, it's not a random act. It's sustained. It's how you do business, and it's in the back of your mind, coming to the forefront of your mind every time you're starting a new initiative or thinking about the work that you're doing. Here, again, are some of the materials that are available either through the website, nextstepsnewhampshire.org, or through PIC. So you can, let's see if this one will open. You can find those resources here again under everything about transition, family engagement, next steps tools for family engagement, and that's the slide we're on. I'm just going to briefly pull up that skills checklist so that you can have an opportunity to look at it. Maybe it will pique your interest so that you'll go to the site and download it. But this is, again, can be used as a great reflection tool, or a tool to prepare to meet with families, and really looking at, again, how are you working with families to develop relationships and trust, and these are some of the key components to doing that. Okay. So that's it. We're going to wrap up. Because this is a recorded webinar, there will be no post-assessment, but I do appreciate you tuning in for this, and hope that you may share it with others at your school or district. You might use it as a training tool, stopping at various points to do the activities yourself, or you might call, again, the Parent Information Center to come in and provide the training and provide ongoing coaching. So that's it. I will end the webinar. And again, feel free to contact the Parent Information Center or the Department of Education if you want any more information about Next Steps New Hampshire or some of the family engagement tools that we discussed today.